The clock on the wall showed 9:47 p.m. when 17-year-old David Johnson locked up Miller's grocery store for the night. His shift had been long and tiring, but he needed the money for college. David pulled his jacket tight against the cold October wind and started his usual walk home through the quiet streets of downtown Cleveland. David was a good kid. He played basketball at Lincoln High School, maintained a B average, and worked 20 hours a week to help his single mother pay the bills. His friends often teased him for being too serious, but David had dreams. He wanted to study engineering and build a better life for himself and his mom. As he walked down Maple Street, David noticed a police car slowly following him. He thought nothing of it at first. Police cars were common in this neighborhood, especially at night. But when he turned left onto Oak Avenue, the car turned too. Then right onto his street, and the car was still there. David's heart started beating faster. He had done nothing wrong, but he knew that sometimes that didn't matter. His mother had given him the talk years ago about how to behave around police officers. Keep your hands visible. Don't make sudden movements. Be respectful. Follow instructions. The police car's light suddenly flashed, and David heard the short burst of a siren. His stomach dropped. The car pulled up beside him, and two officers got out. One was tall and heavy-set with graying hair. The other was younger, maybe in his 30s, with a buzz cut and cold eyes. "Hey you, stop right there," the older officer called out. David stopped walking and turned to face them. His hands were shaking slightly, but he tried to stay calm. "Good evening, officers. Is there a problem?" The younger officer stepped closer. "We need to ask you some questions. There was an armed robbery about an hour ago, and you matched the description of our suspect." David's eyes widened. "I'm sorry, but there must be some mistake. I've been at work all evening. I just got off my shift at Miller's grocery." "Sure you have," the older officer said with a smirk. "That's what they all say. What's your name, kid?" "David Johnson. I live just 2 blocks from here. I can show you my work ID if you want proof I was at the store." David slowly reached for his wallet, making sure to move his hands carefully so the officers could see what he was doing. He pulled out his employee ID card and his driver's license, extending them toward the officers. The younger officer barely glanced at the cards. "These could be fake. How do we know you didn't make these up?" "Officer, I understand you're just doing your job, but I really haven't done anything wrong. You can call the store and ask my manager. There are cameras there that will show I was working." The older officer stepped even closer. David could smell coffee on his breath and see the suspicion in his eyes. "You're being awfully nervous for someone who has nothing to hide. Why don't you empty your pockets for us?" David's heart was racing now, but he complied. He pulled out his phone, his wallet, some loose change, and his house keys. The officers examined each item as if they were evidence of some crime. "Where were you going in such a hurry?" the younger officer asked. "Home. I live with my mother on Elm Street. She's probably wondering where I am by now. At almost 10 o'clock at night? Seems suspicious to me." David couldn't believe what he was hearing. "I work until 9:30. It takes me about 15 minutes to clean up and lock the store. This is the time I always walk home." The two officers stepped away from David and began talking to each other in low voices. David couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could see them glancing at him and shaking their heads. After what felt like forever, they walked back over. "We're going to need you to come with us to the station for questioning," the older officer announced. "Am I under arrest? What am I being charged with?" "You're not under arrest yet. We just want to talk to you downtown. It'll only take a few minutes." David knew his rights. He had learned about them in his government class. "Do I have to go with you if I'm not under arrest?" The younger officer's expression hardened. "Look, kid, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. You can come with us voluntarily, or we can arrest you right now for obstructing justice. Your choice." David felt trapped. He knew he had done nothing wrong, but he also knew that arguing with police officers on a dark street corner wasn't going to end well for him. "Can I call my mother to let her know where I'm going?" "You can call her from the station," the older officer said, pulling out handcuffs. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." "Wait, I thought you said I wasn't under arrest." "This is just a precaution." Standard procedure. The cold metal clicked around David's wrists. The handcuffs were tight and they dug into his skin. The officers led him to their patrol car and put him in the back seat. The plastic seats were uncomfortable, and David struggled to find a position that didn't hurt his shoulders with his hands cuffed behind him. As the car pulled away from the curb, David watched his neighborhood disappear outside the window. He thought about his mother, probably sitting at the kitchen table doing crossword puzzles and waiting for him to come home. She would be worried when he didn't show up on time. The ride to the police station took about 20 minutes. The officers didn't speak to David during the drive, but they talked to each other about sports and weekend plans as if he wasn't even there. David tried to stay calm and think about what he would say when they questioned him. The truth was simple. He had been at work, he had witnesses, and he had done nothing wrong. When they arrived at the station, the officers led David through a maze of hallways to a small room with concrete walls, a metal table, and 3 chairs. There was a camera mounted in one corner of the ceiling, which made David feel a little better. At least there would be a record of whatever happened. "Have a seat," the older officer said, uncuffing David's hands. "Someone will be with you shortly." David rubbed his wrists where the handcuffs had been. Red marks showed where the metal had pressed into his skin. He sat down in one of the chairs and looked around the room. It was cold and sterile, with no windows and harsh fluorescent lighting. Minutes passed slowly. David could hear voices and footsteps in the hallway outside, but no one came to talk to him. He wondered if they had called the grocery store yet to verify his story. He wondered if his mother had tried to call him and gotten worried when he didn't answer. After what felt like an hour but was probably only 20 minutes, the door opened. 2 different officers walked in. One was middle-aged with a badge that said Detective Morrison. The other was younger, maybe in his late 20s, and his nameplate read Officer Carlyle. "So, David," Detective Morrison said, settling into the chair across from him. "We need to talk." David straightened up in his chair. "Yes, sir. I'm ready to answer your questions and clear this up." Officer Carlyle remained standing, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. There was something about his expression that made David uncomfortable, but he tried to focus on Detective Morrison, who seemed more professional. "Before we start," David said, "I'd like to call my mother to let her know where I am. And I think I should probably have a lawyer present." The 2 officers exchanged a look that David couldn't interpret. Detective Morrison leaned back in his chair and smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "Let's not worry about lawyers just yet," he said. "We just want to have a conversation. This will go much faster if you cooperate with us." David felt a chill run down his spine. Something about this situation wasn't right, but he didn't know what else to do except answer their questions and hope they would realize they had the wrong person. What David didn't know was that this was just the beginning of the longest night of his. Detective Morrison opened a thick folder and spread several photographs across the metal table. The images showed a convenience store with shattered glass and overturned displays. In one photo, an elderly clerk sat in a chair with a bandage on his forehead, looking shaken and scared. "Take a good look at these pictures, David," Morrison said, his voice steady but cold. "This is what happened tonight at Peterson's corner store on 5th Street. An armed robbery. The clerk, Mr. Peterson, is 73 years old. He's been running that store for 25 years. Never hurt anybody, just trying to make an honest living." David stared at the photos, his stomach turning. The destruction was horrible, and seeing the injured old man made him feel sick. "This is terrible, but I don't understand why you're showing me this. I told you I was working at Miller's grocery all evening." Officer Carlyle pushed himself off the wall and walked over to the table. "The witness described someone who looks exactly like you. Young black male, about 6 feet tall, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. That's you, isn't it?" "That could describe thousands of people in this city," David replied, trying to keep his voice calm. "I'm telling you the truth. I was at work. You can check with my manager, Jerry Williams. You can look at the security cameras. I punched out at 9:30 just like I do every night." Morrison leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "Here's the thing, David. Mr. Peterson is pretty sure about what he saw. He's been looking at photos for the past hour, and when we showed him yours from your driver's license, he said you looked familiar." David's heart started racing. "My photo? How did you get my photo? And familiar doesn't mean I did anything. Maybe he's seen me around the neighborhood. I live here. I work here. People see me all the time." "Don't get smart with us," Carlyle snapped. "We're trying to help you here. If you cooperate and tell us what really happened, maybe we can work something out. But if you keep lying to us, this is going to get a lot worse for you." David felt like he was in a nightmare. "I'm not lying. I don't need to work anything out because I didn't do anything wrong. Please just call Miller's Grocery. Call my manager. This is all a big misunderstanding. Morrison pulled out another photo, this one showing the cash register with its drawer pulled out and empty. $347, David. That's what you took from an old man who works 16 hours a day just to pay his bills. His wife is in the hospital, did you know that? Cancer treatments. That money was supposed to help pay for her medicine. I didn't take anything from anybody. David's voice was louder now, frustration and fear building inside him. Why won't you listen to me? I have an alibi. I have witnesses. I was at work. Carlisle slammed his hand down on the table, making David jump. Stop lying. We know you did this. The witness identified you. You were in the area at the right time. You match the description perfectly. So do hundreds of other people, David shot back. This is crazy. You're accusing me based on what? Because I'm young and black and I was walking home from work? Morrison's expression darkened. Don't try to make this about race, son. This is about facts, and the facts say you robbed that store. David felt tears of frustration forming in his eyes, but he blinked them back. He couldn't show weakness now. The facts will show I was working. Please just make one phone call. Call Miller's Grocery. The number's in the phone book. We'll get to that, Morrison said dismissively. Right now, we want to hear your version of what happened. Start from the beginning. What time did you leave your house tonight? David took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts. I left home around 1 o'clock this afternoon. I had classes until 3, then I went straight to work. I started my shift at 4 o'clock. I worked in the stockroom until 6, then I moved to the cash register until closing time. Anyone see you there? Carlisle asked, his tone skeptical. Of course. Jerry Williams, my manager. Mrs. Rodriguez, she works the deli counter. Tommy Chen from the produce section. There were customers all evening. The store has security cameras everywhere. Morrison wrote something in his notebook. What about after you left work? Anyone see you walking home? I don't know. I wasn't paying attention to who might be watching me. I was just walking home like I do every night. It's only a 15-minute walk. Convenient, Carlisle muttered. No witnesses for the time when the robbery happened. David's patience was wearing thin. Because I was walking home alone, just like thousands of other people do every night. That doesn't make me a criminal. Morrison stood up and started pacing around the small room. Let me tell you something, David. I've been doing this job for 18 years. I've interviewed hundreds of suspects, and I can always tell when someone is lying. You're lying. I'm not lying. David's voice cracked slightly. I'm telling you the absolute truth. I have never been in Peterson's corner store in my life. I don't even know where it is. It's on 5th Street, just 6 blocks from where we picked you up, Carlisle said. Easy walking distance from Miller's Grocery. So what? There are a lot of places within walking distance of where I work. That doesn't mean I robbed them. Morrison stopped pacing and stared at David intensely. Here's what I think happened. You finished work, you were walking home, and you saw an opportunity. Old man, small store, probably not much security. Easy target. So you went in, threatened him, took the money and ran. That's not what happened because I didn't do it. David was getting desperate now. The officers seemed determined to ignore everything he was saying. Please, I'm begging you, just make one phone call. Verify my story. It will take 5 minutes. Carlisle laughed, but there was no humor in it. You really think we're stupid, don't you? You think we're just going to believe whatever story you make up? It's not a story. It's the truth. Morrison sat back down and leaned across the table until his face was inches from David's. The truth is that you robbed that store. The truth is that you hurt an innocent old man. The truth is that you're a criminal and we're going to prove it. David could smell Morrison's coffee breath and see the small blood vessels in his eyes. I want a lawyer, he said quietly. What was that? Morrison asked. I said I want a lawyer. I have the right to have a lawyer present during questioning. Carlisle rolled his eyes. Here we go with the lawyer talk. You watch too much TV, kid. This isn't some detective show. This is real life. I know my rights, David said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. I want to call my mother and I want a lawyer. Morrison sat back in his chair and exchanged another look with Carlisle. Tell you what, David. Let's forget about lawyers for now. Help us understand what really happened tonight. And maybe we can help you. Young kid like you probably just made a mistake. Everyone makes mistakes. I didn't make any mistakes because I didn't do anything wrong. The witness says otherwise, Carlisle said. Mr. Peterson is pretty sure about what he saw. Are you calling him a liar? David felt trapped. I'm not calling anyone a liar. I'm saying he made a mistake. People make mistakes all the time, especially when they're scared and hurt. Morrison pulled out another photo, this one a close-up of Mr. Peterson's injured forehead. Does this look like a mistake to you? This man was terrorized tonight. His store was destroyed. His sense of safety is gone forever. And you did this to him. No, I didn't. David's voice was getting hoarse from the stress. I would never hurt anyone. I'm not that kind of person. What kind of person are you, David? Morrison asked. The kind who works hard and goes to school? The kind who helps his mother pay the bills? That's what you want us to believe? Yes, because that's who I am, Carlyle snorted. Right. And I suppose you've never been in trouble before? Never stolen anything? Never got into fights? No, I haven't. You can check my record. I've never been arrested. I've never even gotten a speeding ticket. First time for everything, Morrison said with a cold smile. The room felt like it was getting smaller. David could feel sweat forming on his forehead despite the cold air. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter and harsher than before. He looked up at the camera in the corner, hoping someone was watching. Someone who would see that this wasn't right. I want to call my mother, David said again, and I want a lawyer. Those are my rights. Morrison stood up again, this time moving to stand behind David's chair. Your rights? Let me tell you about rights, son. Mr. Peterson had the right to work in his store without being threatened. He had the right to feel safe in his own business. You took those rights away from him. David could feel Morrison's presence behind him looming over his chair. It made him uncomfortable, but he tried not to show it. I didn't take anything away from anyone. I wasn't there. The evidence says you were there, Carlyle said. The witness says you were there? What more do we need? The truth, David replied. You need the truth. Morrison walked back around to face David. The truth is whatever we can prove in court, and right now we can prove you robbed that store. David felt a chill run through his body. These officers weren't interested in finding out what really happened. They had already decided he was guilty, and nothing he said was going to change their minds. I want a lawyer, he said one more time, his voice barely above a whisper. Morrison and Carlyle looked at each other again, and David saw something pass between them that made his stomach turn. Whatever was about to happen next, he knew it wasn't going to be good. The clock on the wall showed 12:15 a.m. when Detective Morrison finally responded to David's request for a lawyer. His smile was cold and unsettling as he leaned back in his chair. You know what, David? I think you're confused about how this works. See, you're not officially under arrest yet. We're just having a conversation. And during conversations, people don't need lawyers. David felt his heart sink. But you handcuffed me. You brought me here against my will. How is that not being arrested? Officer Carlyle laughed from his position by the door. That was for officer safety. Standard procedure, but technically you're free to leave anytime you want. Really? David started to stand up. Then I'd like to go home now. Sit down, Morrison's voice was sharp and commanding. When David hesitated, Carlyle stepped forward threateningly. David slowly lowered himself back into the chair. See, here's the thing, Morrison continued, his voice returning to its deceptively calm tone. You could leave, but then we'd have to arrest you for the robbery. And once you're officially arrested, things get a lot more complicated. Paperwork, booking, jail cell. Your mother would have to come downtown in the middle of the night. Is that really what you want? David realized he was trapped in an impossible situation. Stay and be questioned without a lawyer or leave and be arrested. This isn't right. This isn't how it's supposed to work. Life isn't fair, kid, Carlyle said with a shrug. The sooner you learn that, the better off you'll be. Morrison pulled out a notepad and clicked his pen. Now let's try this again. Tell us exactly what you did after you left work tonight. And this time, try telling the truth. I've been telling the truth. Or this whole time, David said, exhaustion creeping into his voice. I walked straight home from Miller's grocery. I've told you this 5 times already. Then tell us a 6th time, Morrison demanded. Every detail. What route did you take? Who did you see? What were you thinking about? David rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building. I took my usual route. Down Maple Street, left on Oak Avenue, then onto my street. I wasn't thinking about anything special. I was tired from work and just wanted to get home. Did you stop anywhere? Talk to anyone? No, I just walked home. Carlyle moved closer to the table. That's funny, because we have a witness who says they saw someone matching your description running away from Peterson's corner store around 10:15. David's head snapped up. That's impossible. At 10:15 I was already home. My mother can tell you that, can she? Morrison asked. Because we tried calling your house about an hour ago. No answer. David felt panic rising in his chest. She must have been asleep. She goes to bed early because she has to work in the morning. Did you try again? Why would we need to try again if you're telling the truth? Carlyle asked mockingly. Because it would prove I'm innocent. David's voice was getting louder again. One phone call would end all of this. Morrison stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You know what I think? I think you're stalling. I think you're trying to give your mother time to come up with a story to cover for you. That's ridiculous. My mother doesn't even know I'm here. She's probably worried sick. Maybe she should be worried, Carlyle said coldly. Maybe she should have raised her son better. The comment hit David like a physical blow. Don't talk about my mother like that. She's a good person. She raised me right, did she? Because good kids don't rob stores. I didn't rob any store. David was on his feet now, his hands clenched into fists. The stress and frustration of the past 3 hours was boiling over. Morrison was around the table in an instant, grabbing David by the shoulders and shoving him back into his chair. Sit down and stay down. The push was harder than necessary, and David's chair tilted backward. He threw out his hands to catch himself, but his chair hit the concrete wall behind him. The impact jarred his head and he felt a sharp pain above his right eyebrow. Ow! David brought his hand up to his forehead and felt something wet. When he looked at his fingers, they were red with blood. Carlyle burst out laughing. Look at that. Tough guy can't even sit in a chair without hurting himself. Morrison was laughing too. Maybe if you weren't so busy lying to us, you'd pay more attention to where you're sitting. David pressed his hand against the cut, trying to stop the bleeding. I need medical attention. This is bleeding pretty bad. What you need is to start telling the truth, Morrison said, settling back into his chair as if nothing had happened. Answer our questions honestly, and maybe we'll get you a Band-Aid. I have been telling the truth. I need to see a doctor or a nurse. This could need stitches. Carlyle was still chuckling. Stitches? For that little scratch? You're tougher than that, aren't you? Blood was dripping down David's face now, staining his work shirt. He could taste it when it reached the corner of his mouth. Please, I need help. This is a lot of blood. I've seen worse, Morrison said dismissively. Paper cuts bleed more than that. David looked up at the camera in the corner of the room, hoping whoever was watching would see what was happening and send help, but the small red light that should have been blinking was dark. Is that camera working? He asked. Morrison followed his gaze and shrugged. Technical difficulties. Happens all the time. Budget cuts, you know how it is. David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold room. They were alone in here, with no one watching, no record being made of what was happening. I want to call my mother, he said quietly, and I want medical attention. Those are basic rights. Rights, Carlyle repeated mockingly. You keep talking about rights. What about Mr. Peterson's rights? What about his right not to be terrorized by punks like you? I'm not a punk and I didn't terrorize anyone. Morrison leaned forward again. Then prove it. Tell us what really happened. Confess and we can end this whole thing right now. Confess to what? I didn't do anything. Sure you did. You saw an opportunity, you took it. Simple as that. David wiped blood from his eye with the back of his hand. Even if I wanted to confess to something I didn't do, which I don't, what kind of confession would that be? It wouldn't be true. The truth is whatever helps us close this case, Morrison said bluntly. The casual admission sent a shock through David. You don't care if I actually did it or not, do you? You just want someone to blame. Carlyle clapped slowly. Give the kid a prize. He's finally starting to understand how this works. This is insane, David muttered, more to himself than to them. This can't be legal. What's legal and what happens in this room are two different things, Morrison said. And right now you're in our room playing by our rules. David tried to think clearly despite the pain in his head and the blood still trickling down his face. He needed to find a way out of this situation before it got worse. But every option seemed to lead to the same place. They wanted a confession, and they weren't going to let him go until they got one. What if I told you what you want to hear? He asked carefully. Hypothetically. What would happen then? Morrison's eyes lit up. Now you're thinking smart. You cooperate with us. Tell us what happened and we can work something out. Maybe we say it was a first offense, kid made a mistake. Judge might go easy on you. But I would have to say I did something I didn't do. You'd have to tell the truth, Carlyle corrected. The truth that you robbed that store? David shook his head, immediately regretting the movement as it made the cut throb. I can't do that. I won't lie and say I committed a crime I didn't commit. Morrison's friendly expression disappeared instantly. Then you're stupider than I thought. We're trying to help you here and you're too dumb to see it. This isn't help. This is coercion. Carlyle moved behind David's chair again. Big words for a high school dropout. I'm not a dropout. I'm a senior. I have a 3.2 GPA. Not anymore, you don't, Morrison said. Once word gets out about this, you think any college is going to want you. You think any employer is going to hire you? Your life is over, kid. The only question is whether it ends with a slap on the wrist or 20 years in prison. David felt tears forming in his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He wouldn't give these men the satisfaction of seeing him break down completely. My mother is going to be so worried, he said quietly. She doesn't know where I am. She doesn't know what happened to me. Should have thought of that before you decided to rob that store, Carlyle said without sympathy. For the 100th time, I didn't rob any store. Morrison slammed his hand on the table. Stop lying. We know you did it. The witness identified you. You were in the area. You have no alibi. I do have an alibi. I was at work. I've told you this over and over. Work alibi, Carlyle scoffed. Easy to fake. Buddy system. Your manager probably lies for you all the time. David was running out of energy to fight. The blood loss, the stress, the hours of accusations were wearing him down. But he couldn't give up. He couldn't confess to something he didn't do no matter how tired he was. What time is it? He asked. Morrison checked his watch. Almost 1 in the morning. Past your bedtime? I've been here for over 3 hours. When are you going to check my alibi? When are you going to call the store? When we feel like it, Carlyle answered. David closed his eyes and tried to think of his mother, probably lying awake now, wondering why he hadn't come home. He thought of his dreams of college, of becoming an engineer, of building a better life. All of it seemed impossibly far away now. When he opened his eyes, both officers were staring at him with expressions that made his blood run cold. Something had changed in the room, and David realized with growing horror that his ordeal was far from over. 3 floors above the interrogation room, State Attorney General Patricia Hayes was having the worst night of her career. She had received a disturbing phone call 2 hours earlier from a retired police officer named Frank Rodriguez. Frank had worked in law enforcement for 30 years before becoming a security guard, and what he told her made her stomach turn. I've been working nights at the medical building across from the 10th District Station, Frank had explained over the phone. For the past 6 months, I've been seeing things that don't sit right with me. Officers bringing in young people, mostly minorities, and they stay in there for hours. Some come out looking beaten up. I hear shouting, sometimes screaming. I think something bad is happening over there. Patricia had been the state attorney general for 4 years, and she took civil rights violations very seriously. She had prosecuted corrupt police officers before, and she knew that misconduct often happened in the shadows, away from cameras and witnesses. Have you reported this to anyone? She had asked Frank. I tried. I called the station's internal affairs department twice. Both times they told me they would look into it. That was months ago and nothing has changed. If anything, it's gotten worse. Patricia had made a decision that surprised even herself. I'm coming down there tonight. Tonight? It's almost midnight. If what you're telling me is true, then every night we wait is another end. Someone could be getting hurt. Patricia Hayes wasn't the type of person to sit behind a desk and wait for reports. She had grown up in a working-class neighborhood and had fought her way through law school and up the ranks of the prosecutor's office. She believed in seeing things for herself. Now, as she pulled into the parking lot of the 10th District Station with her senior investigator, Michael Torres, she felt a familiar mix of determination and dread. She had conducted surprise inspections before, but something about tonight felt different. Are you sure about this, Patricia? Michael asked as they walked toward the building. We could come back tomorrow with a full team. If Frank Rodriguez is right, we can't wait until tomorrow. Besides, surprise visits are when you see the truth. When people have time to prepare, they clean up their act. The desk sergeant looked surprised when Patricia and Michael walked through the front doors at 1:30 in the morning. He clearly recognized the state attorney general, and his expression immediately became nervous. Ms. Hayes, we weren't expecting you. Is there something we can help you with? Patricia showed her badge and ID. This is an unannounced inspection. We're going to take a look around. Speak with some officers, review some procedures. At this time of night, most of our administrative staff has gone home. That's fine. We're more interested in operations anyway. What's happening right now? Any arrests? Any interrogations in progress? The desk sergeant glanced at his computer screen nervously. Well, we do have one person being questioned. Robbery suspect. But the detectives are still working on that. I'd like to observe, Patricia said. I'm not sure that's a good idea. The interrogation is at a sensitive point. Maybe we could arrange something for later? Patricia's instincts were telling her something was wrong. In her experience, honest police officers were usually happy to show off their professional work. When they tried to hide something, there was usually a reason. I'm not here to interfere with police work, she said firmly. I just want to observe. Where is this interrogation taking place? The desk sergeant looked like he wanted to refuse, but he knew he couldn't stop the state attorney general from doing her job. Room 3 down the hall and to the left. But please don't interrupt. This is an important case. Patricia and Michael walked down the hallway, their footsteps echoing in the quiet building. Most of the offices were dark, but there was light coming from under the door of room 3. As they got closer, Patricia could hear voices inside. The first thing she noticed was laughter. Loud, cruel laughter that definitely didn't sound professional. Then she heard a young voice, strained and desperate. Please, I need medical attention. I'm bleeding. More laughter, followed by a man's voice. What you need is to start telling the truth. Patricia felt her anger rising. She had heard enough. Without knocking, she turned the handle and pushed open the door. The scene that greeted her was worse than anything Frank Rodriguez had described. A young man, barely more than a teenager, was slumped in a chair with blood covering the right side of his face. His shirt was stained red and he looked exhausted and scared. 2 officers stood over him and one was holding his phone up as if taking pictures. What the hell is going on here? Patricia's voice cut through the room like a knife. Detective Morrison and Officer Carlyle spun around, their faces going white when they saw who was standing in the doorway. Morrison quickly put his phone away, but not before Patricia saw what he was doing. Attorney General Hayes, Morrison stammered. We weren't expecting... This is just a routine interrogation. Patricia looked at the young man in the chair, then back at the officers. Routine? This boy is bleeding and clearly needs medical attention. How long has he been like this? It's just a small cut, Carlyle said quickly. He fell and hit his head on the wall. Accident. Patricia walked over to David and knelt down beside his chair. Up close, she could see that the cut was deep and still bleeding. There was blood on the wall behind him and more blood on the floor. What's your name, son? She asked gently. David looked at her with confusion and hope. David Johnson, ma'am. I've been here for hours. They won't let me call my mother or get medical help. Patricia felt her jaw clench. She turned to Morrison. How long has this young man been in custody? About 4 hours, Morrison admitted reluctantly. And in all that time, no one thought to clean his wound or provide medical attention? We were focused on getting answers to important questions, Carlyle said defensively. Patricia pulled out her phone and dialed 911. This is State Attorney General Patricia Hayes. I need an ambulance at the 10th District Police Station immediately. We have a young man who needs medical attention. That's not necessary, Morrison protested. It's really not that bad. Patricia ignored him and spoke to David again. Have you asked for a lawyer? Yes, ma'am. Multiple times. They told me I don't need one because I'm not officially under arrest. But you're not free to leave either, are you? David shook his head, wincing at the movement. They said if I tried to leave, they would arrest me for robbery. Patricia's anger was building to a dangerous level. She had seen police misconduct before, but this was beyond anything she had encountered. These officers weren't just violating department policy, they were violating basic human rights. Michael Torres, who had been standing quietly in the doorway, spoke up. Detective Morris and Officer Carlyle, I'm going to need you both to step outside right now. We're in the middle of an important interrogation. Morrison protested. The interrogation is over, Patricia said firmly. This young man is going to receive medical attention, and then we're going to have a very serious conversation about what's been happening in this room. Carlyle looked like he wanted to argue, but Morrison grabbed his arm. Come on, he muttered. Let's go. As the 2 officers reluctantly left the room, Patricia turned her attention back to David. I'm going to stay with you until the paramedics arrive. Can you tell me what happened tonight? Start from the beginning. David's voice was hoarse and weak, but he managed to tell his story. He explained about walking home from work, being stopped by police, and being brought to the station for questioning. He told her about asking for a lawyer and being denied. He described how the interrogation had escalated, how he had been pushed and injured, and how the officers had laughed at his pain. "Have you been given anything to eat or drink?" Patricia asked. "No, ma'am. I asked for water several times, but they said I didn't need it." Patricia felt sick. What she was hearing wasn't just misconduct. It was torture. These officers had systematically deprived this young man of his basic rights and needs, while trying to coerce a confession from him. "What about your alibi? Did they check your story about being at work?" David's eyes filled with tears of frustration. "I begged them to call Miller's Grocery. I gave them my manager's name, told them about the security cameras. They just kept saying I was lying." When the paramedics arrived, Patricia watched as they examined David's injury. The cut was deep enough to require stitches, and he was showing signs of dehydration and exhaustion. "How long has he been bleeding like this?" one of the paramedics asked. "Several hours, apparently," Patricia replied, shooting a meaningful look at Michael. As they loaded David onto a stretcher, he grabbed Patricia's hand. "Are you going to help me? Are you going to find out the truth?" Patricia squeezed his hand gently. "I promise you, David, we're going to get to the bottom of this, and we're going to make sure nothing like this ever happens again." As the ambulance pulled away with David inside, Patricia turned to Michael with fire in her eyes. "I want everything. Security footage, phone records, witness statements. I want to know exactly what happened here tonight, and I want to know if this has happened before." "What about Morrison and Carlisle?" "They're suspended immediately pending a full investigation." "And Michael?" "I want you to personally verify David's alibi. Call the grocery store, check the cameras, talk to his co-workers. If this kid is innocent, and I suspect he is, then these officers just committed a federal crime." Patricia Hayes had prosecuted a lot of criminals in her career, but she had never felt more determined to see justice done than she did at that moment. What she had witnessed in that interrogation room was an attack on everything she believed in, and she was going to make sure there were consequences. The night was far from over, but for the first time in hours, David Johnson had someone fighting for him. 6 months after that terrible night in the interrogation room, David Johnson stood in front of a packed courthouse, adjusting his tie nervously as dozens of reporters pointed cameras and microphones at him. The scared, bleeding teenager from that night had grown into a confident young man with a powerful voice and an unshakable sense of purpose. "Today isn't just about what happened to me," David said into the microphones. "It's about making sure this never happens to anyone else." The journey to this moment had been long and difficult. After Patricia Hayes found him in that interrogation room, David had spent 2 days in the hospital recovering from his injuries and the trauma of his ordeal. The cut on his forehead required 12 stitches and left a small scar that would remind him forever of that night. But even before David was released from the hospital, Patricia's investigation had already begun to uncover the truth. Within 24 hours, her team had gathered enough evidence to completely vindicate David and expose the shocking misconduct of Detective Morrison and Officer Carlisle. The first breakthrough came when investigator Michael Torres called Miller's Grocery Store and spoke with David's manager, Jerry Williams. Jerry not only confirmed that David had worked his full shift that evening, but he also provided security camera footage that showed David at the store until 9:30 p.m. The timestamp on the footage proved that David was at work when the robbery occurred. "That boy is one of my best employees," Jerry had told Michael. "Hard worker, never missed a day, always honest. When I heard what happened to him, I was furious. How could they not even bother to check his story?" The security cameras told an even more damaging story about the police officer's conduct. While the camera in the interrogation room had mysteriously malfunctioned, the hallway cameras were working perfectly. The footage showed Morrison and Carlisle entering and leaving the room multiple times, sometimes carrying coffee and snacks for themselves while David was denied even water. More disturbing was the audio that Michael's technical team was able to recover from a backup system. Even though the main recording equipment had been disabled, a secondary system had captured hours of conversation from the interrogation room. When Patricia listened to the recordings, she was horrified by what she heard. The audio revealed the full extent of the officers' cruelty. It captured their laughter when David was injured, their refusal to provide medical care, and their deliberate attempts to coerce a false confession. Most damning of all, it recorded Morrison telling Carlisle, "The truth is, whatever helps us close this case." But Patricia's investigation revealed something even more shocking. David wasn't the first victim. As word of the investigation spread, other young people began coming forward with similar stories. Over the past 2 years, Morrison and Carlisle had been involved in at least 8 cases of misconduct during interrogations. There was Anthony Williams, a 19-year-old college student who had been held for 14 hours without food or water until he confessed to a car theft he didn't commit. There was Maria Gonzalez, a 17-year-old girl who had been subjected to hours of verbal abuse and threats until she agreed to implicate her boyfriend in a drug case. And there was Tyler Brown, a 16-year-old who had been slapped and pushed during questioning about a vandalism incident. The pattern was clear. Morrison and Carlisle specifically targeted young minorities, used psychological and sometimes physical abuse to break them down, and coerced false confessions to close cases quickly. They had been getting away with it for years because most of their victims were too scared or too poor to fight back. Frank Rodriguez, the security guard whose phone call had started it all, became a key witness in the investigation. His detailed logs and photographs from across the street provided crucial evidence of the pattern of abuse. "I knew something was wrong," Frank testified. "You don't hear that much screaming from a police station if everything is normal." The criminal trial of Morrison and Carlisle lasted 3 weeks and made national headlines. Patricia personally prosecuted the case, determined to see justice done. The evidence was overwhelming, and the jury took less than 4 hours to find both officers guilty on multiple federal charges, including civil rights violations, assault, and conspiracy. Detective Morrison was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Officer Carlisle received 6 years. Both men lost their pensions and were permanently barred from working in law enforcement, but the criminal convictions were only the beginning. Patricia's investigation had exposed systemic problems within the entire police department. The federal government stepped in and placed the department under a consent decree, requiring comprehensive reforms to training, supervision, and accountability. The police chief resigned in disgrace. The department's internal affairs division was completely restructured. New protocols were put in place to ensure that all interrogations were properly recorded and that suspects' rights were protected. Every officer in the department was required to undergo extensive retraining on constitutional law and proper interrogation techniques. David's civil rights lawsuit against the city resulted in a $2.3 million settlement, but he made it clear that the money wasn't what mattered most to him. "I would give back every penny if it meant no other kid would go through what I went through," he said at the press conference announcing the settlement. With Patricia's encouragement, David had become a powerful advocate for police reform and civil rights. He spoke at schools, community centers, and law enforcement conferences, sharing his story and calling for change. His message was always the same: police officers are supposed to protect and serve, not intimidate and abuse. "What happened to me could happen to anyone," David would tell audiences. "But it shouldn't happen to anyone. We need police officers who see young people as future leaders, not as automatic suspects." David's mother, Linda, had been devastated when she learned what her son had endured. "That night when he didn't come home, I called everyone I could think of," she said tearfully at one of David's speaking events. "I never imagined he was being tortured by the people who were supposed to protect him." The case had also profoundly affected Patricia Hayes. She had seen a lot of injustice in her career. But David's case reminded her why she had become a prosecutor in the first place. "This case taught me that we can never take civil rights for granted," she said. "We have to fight for them every day, and we have to hold people in power accountable when they abuse that power." The other victims of Morrison and Carlisle's abuse had their convictions overturned, and several received financial settlements from the city. Anthony Williams went back to college and was studying to become a civil rights lawyer. Maria Gonzalez became a social worker, dedicated to helping young people navigate the legal system. Tyler Brown started a nonprofit organization that provided legal assistance to teenagers who couldn't afford lawyers. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a psychologist who had worked with several of the victims, noted the remarkable resilience they had all shown. "These young people could have been broken by what happened to them," she said. "Instead, they've turned their trauma into a force for positive change." They're living proof that justice can heal. The reforms implemented as a result of the case were adopted by police departments across the country. The Johnson Protocol, named after David, required that all interrogations be recorded, that suspects be provided with food and water, and that medical attention be provided immediately for any injuries. Departments that followed the protocol saw significant decreases in false confessions and civil rights complaints. As David stood outside the courthouse 6 months after his ordeal, he reflected on how much his life had changed. He was still planning to study engineering in college, but now he also wanted to minor in criminal justice. "I want to understand the system so I can help fix it," he explained. Patricia Hayes, who had become something of a mentor to David, watched proudly as he answered reporters' questions with poise and wisdom beyond his years. "David Johnson represents the best of what America can be," she said. "He faced injustice and chose to fight back with truth and determination. He's going to change the world." The security guard Frank Rodriguez, whose conscience had started it all, was honored by the city council for his courage in reporting what he had witnessed. "I just did what anyone should do when they see something wrong," he said humbly. The real heroes are David and the other young people who had the courage to speak out. As the press conference ended and the reporters packed up their equipment, David walked over to Patricia and shook her hand. "Thank you," he said simply, "for believing me, for fighting for me, for saving my life." Patricia smiled and put her hand on David's shoulder. "You saved your own life by refusing to give up. You never let them break you, and that's what made all the difference." Looking back on that terrible night 6 months earlier, David realized that while it had been the worst experience of his life, it had also led to something meaningful. Morrison and Carlisle would never hurt anyone again. The police department had been forced to change. Other young people would be protected by the reforms that had been implemented. Sometimes, David said in his final interview that day, "The worst things that happen to us can become the catalyst for the best changes we can make. What happened to me was wrong, but if it prevents it from happening to others, then maybe something good came out of it after all." As David walked away from the courthouse that day, the small scar on his forehead caught the afternoon sunlight. It was a reminder of pain but also of survival. It was proof that even in the darkest moments, justice could still prevail, and that one person's courage to speak the truth could change everything. The case of David Johnson versus the city had ended, but his work was just beginning. He had discovered his purpose in that terrible interrogation room, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure that justice was more than just a word on a courthouse wall.